Thank you. There we go. So thank you everybody for joining today, and we'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody will join me. Trying to get the flag there, I think. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, we will get going here, and we will start with our first item, which is just an update on the remote committee meetings. And I believe Lynette has this for us this morning. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you. Good morning. Your clerk to the board here with an item regarding remote committee meetings, as Chair Saragosa just mentioned. As you may be aware, the governor's executive order that made changes to the Brown Act to allow for remote online meetings and waived certain posting requirements expired on September 30th. Legislation AB 361 was signed by the governor in September that makes provisions for continued flexibility for public meetings. AB 361 allows SACOG to continue to hold remote online meetings as long as there is a governor-issued state of emergency, and that each legislative body, SACOG committees and the board, make a determination by resolution that state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. SACOG plans to continue meeting remotely as long as Sacramento County recommends physical distancing, and staff will continue to review that this recommendation is still in place in advance of each meeting. This item is the first item on today's agenda, as the resolution in your packet authorizes this meeting to be held remotely. Consistent with the stipulations in AB 361, a resolution will be brought to this committee each month to allow these meetings to be held remotely. Staff recommends approval of the resolution, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you, Lynette. Do we have any questions, comments? Do we have any public comments on this item?
No public comment.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second by Frericks.
Thank you both. Roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Frericks?
Aye.
Gog?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Aye.
Stollard?
Aye.
Thomas? Absent. Vice Chair Kozlowski?
I'm going to abstain because I just joined and I don't know what we're voting on.
And Chair Saragosa?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and welcome Mike. We'll go ahead and move to item 2, which is approval of the minutes of the October 4th meeting. Any questions on the minutes?
Stallard moves the approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Tom.
Second that.
Second, Director Gog. Any public comments?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Frericks?
Yes.
Gog?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Aye.
Stollard?
Aye.
Thomas? Absent. Vice Chair Kozlowski?
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We're going to go ahead and move to item 3, which is approval again of the 2022 SACOG meeting schedule. And Lynette has this item for us as well.
Thank you. Feeling a little special today that I get to present 2 items to you today. This item before you is the proposed meeting schedule for 2022. Staff is requesting that the committee recommend that the board approve the meeting schedule. The items I'm about to go over are included in your staff report, but I'm pointing them out because they're important. The calendar includes all of SACOG's board-related meetings, including board and policy committee meetings, the mega region working group meetings, and the race, equity, and inclusion working group meetings. Again, this year, we proposed no committee meetings in January. Instead, staff items would proceed directly to the January board meeting. It is proposed that the Policy and Innovation Committee will meet twice in August, first on August 8th and then again on August 29th. The August 29th meeting is due to the Labor Day holiday on September 5th, which is when the committee would normally meet. As you can see on the calendar, we're currently holding 2 dates for a board retreat, March 25th and May 20th. But based on recent polling responses from board members, we may need to look at additional dates. So please stay tuned for more information about this in the coming month. We propose holding the November board meeting 1 week earlier on November 10th to avoid a conflict with CSAC's annual conference. And at this time, we also propose that the last regular board meeting of 2022 be held in November. The election for SACOG leadership would take place at that meeting to ensure that we have a quorum of members present for that important action. It's our recommendation to not schedule a December board meeting because 2022 is an election year, and for some elections, seats are vacated in early December. This can make it difficult to determine who's a seated voting member for our December board meeting. And additionally, several jurisdictions change their appointments to our board in December. So as the year progresses, if staff determines that there are items that require board approval in December, we would then schedule a special board meeting. Again, the recommendation is that the committee request that the board approve the meeting schedule, and I'm happy to take any questions or any comments about potential conflicts with our proposed meeting dates.
Okay, thank you, Lynette. Any questions from board members or comments? I do think that's a good idea on moving the time, because I know we've run into this issue in the past where we had we had a lot of changes. So that does provide some more continuity when it comes to those votes for chair and vice chair. Okay, no, I see no questions. Do we have any public comments?
No public comment.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion on the schedule.
Motion approval.
All right, I'll take Director Gog and Bernasconi on the second. Thank you. Roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Frericks,
Yes.
Gog,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
Stollard,
Aye.
Thomas, absent, Vice Chair Kozlowski,
Yes.
and Chair Saragosa.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you, and thank you.
You
Yes,
mind if I just make a couple of comments?
absolutely, absolutely.
Lynette did such a nice job presenting that. I know there were no questions. She answered all of them in advance, but I know that these are sort of in the weeds, but they're important. They're important in terms of your all's ability to show up. We are and attend these meetings. We are hoping to go to either hybrid or full in-person meetings in 2022. Our fingers are crossed. Two things that we looked at, and this was in your surveys, but I do want to just make sure you understood. There was interest in having the SACOG board meet at an earlier start time on the full board meeting at 9 a.m. And I think generally, and Lynette, you can fill me in here. If it were to continue to be fully remote, I think that was of interest to people. But I think for some of our board members who were a little further afield, had longer to go, they were not interested in trying to make it by the 9 a.m. start time, just given difficulties in the commute. So that was the first thing that was sort of on the table. And the second is we put a lot of our extra working groups on here this time around, which I think is really important just to make sure you all understand those. The Mega Region Working Group, as Lynette said, Race Equity Inclusion Working Group, Those are going to be the membership there of the mega region group will stay consistent, as well as the REI working group that will meet into 2022. The strategic planning committee is all the current board leadership and all the former board chairs. So that will change likely in 2022. There was interest in moving the time of that meeting. We could not find, Lynette could not find a time that would work better. I know Director Saragosa, you in particular have said you'd like to find a new time. So please keep these on your calendars for now. And because that membership may change of that committee, including the board retreat, we recognize there are some sort of outstanding questions here, but I just want to let you know a little bit, things that are still quite not nailed down, but that's why we wanted to at least give you this schedule now for approval. And we'll continue to work on fine tuning it. Does that sound good, Lynette? Did I get that right?
Perfect. Yes.
Thank you, James. And I think that's the one thing I'm really hoping for, is that we can nail down the retreat date. For some of us, I think there's a lot of new board members that have never met, or at least haven't seen all of us in one place for the 2 years they've been in office. So it would be nice to be able to see everybody in person here. So again, thanks, James. Thanks, Lynette. Okay, we'll move on to item 4, which is the extension of legal services agreement. And Mr. Johnson has this for us this morning. So thank you, Eric.
Yeah, good morning. So this item before you today is asking for a 1-year extension of the contract that SACOG has with Sloan, Sakai, Young, and Wong for our legal services. We entered into this agreement back in 2018 for 3 years. The board has approved one-year extension, and this would be the final extension to bring the contract to 5 years, which is our standard practice. Some of you may recall that Kirk Trost, who's on, was in-house general counsel to us and joined the firm. So all of our legal services are now with that firm. This would bring the contract through February of 2023. So next year, I would bring forward information to the board about procuring legal services after the expiration of this contract. But all of the costs for legal services are contained within the existing approved budget. And we expect that we'd be able to also contain all those costs in the budget we'll bring before you next May. So this is essentially just a time extension of the agreement through the term that was contemplated by the board back in 2018. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions for Eric? All right, seeing none. Do we have any public comments?
No public comment.
Okay, so we'll bring it back to the board. Do we have a motion on this item?
Stallard will move that we adopt the recommended action.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Lozano, second.
Thank you, Rich. Okay, we have a first and a second. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, roll call, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Frericks?
Yes.
Gog?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Aye.
Stallard?
Aye.
Thomas? Absent. Vice Chair Kozlowski?
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa. Did Chair Saragosa drop off? Oh,
I believe he's frozen.
I think we have some technical difficulties, but motion carries. Vice Chair Kozlowski, are you okay taking over the meeting at this point?
Yes, as long as you will call the next item, please.
Sure. And next item, item 5, is the advocacy update with Sabrina.
Good morning, Sabrina Bradbury, SACOG staff. I'm going to turn it over to our federal lobbyists for an update on the infrastructure bill that was passed out of the House late Friday. But before that, I just wanted to mention on the state advocacy side, we are working on updating our advocacy principles. We'll be bringing those to you next month, and you'll hear a bit more in a couple items later on your agenda about some stakeholder meetings that we held with member jurisdictions, local governments, and developers to work with them on what our advocacy around Green Means Go looks like next year. And so you'll get a summary about that from Casey. And with that, I'll turn it over to Devin to update you on the federal side.
Devin, I'm sorry, just Michael, just real fast. I'm having unstable internet connection on my end. So Mike, I think you already did this, but I'll turn the virtual gavel over to you as we move forward here. I'm going to put thank you. And thank you, Devin.
Good thing.
No problem.
Yeah, let me just flip through a couple of slides. Guys, this is the most exciting. I spend all of my time with my family trying to explain what they believe is that Congress is doing nothing at all times. But I promise you, behind the scenes, they have been doing work. And although it was really ugly and there's a lot of bad press and it took forever, they did actually pass the infrastructure bill. It's the one on the left. It actually ended up around 1.2 trillion. It is all the kinds of infrastructure that we know and love. So it's all the surface transportation modes, including highways and transit, rail, ports, a whole bunch of climate money, electricity, resilience. Also, I should have mentioned Jason's also on the call, but he's at APTA, so he's on mute as he is conferencing it up down in Florida. For all the good news about the infrastructure bill that passed, the slightly less good news is that the reconciliation bill still hasn't completely moved through the process yet, and it's going a little bit slower. That bill, as you might remember, is around 2 trillion. The number goes up and down as they figure out what's in and what's out. That bill is on a slower trajectory as they work through the politics. They got some promises made about folks moving forward with it once people know how much it actually costs. It's not quite there yet. But sticking to the good news. So we had a whole bunch of things that we've talked about earlier that Congress was working on. The bulk of those, including reconciliation, the debt ceiling, and government funding, all will move to the December timeframe, but infrastructure is done. So it's surface reauth. So we're in a really good place in terms of the programs that we are most focused on. So one, this is a slide you all have seen before, but this is just to give you a sense of about half of the money goes through formula, which means it flows directly through California. You can see, compared to the FAST Act, which is the last surface transportation bill, how much more money we're looking at for the highway and transit programs, including the planning programs that help fund SACOG. This is that same chart. It's just spread out over 5 years. So you can see that some of the funding will grow as it moves through the 5-year process, but this is 5 years of dedicated money that will flow to the state. An important thing to note about formula funding is the main way that states, MPOs, transit agencies get the bulk, the core funding that they use to fund the various programs. This is applied by various metrics. So it's called formula funding because it's based on a formula that flows almost automatically as soon as the bill is passed. There's a little bit of hold up with some of the increases as they make sure that there's flexibility through the appropriations bill, but this is quick money that will go out the door and that we'll see over the course of the next 5 years every year. And then this funding is also program based. So it's some of the big programs, any of the new capacity programs tend to be in this pot of funding, transit money, none of the, just to note the difference, it's a lot of the highway and transit programs, none of the rail programs are in this pot. But there is a ton of money on top of what we just talked about. So on top of the formula programs, there is a ton of new money that's going to flow to the Department of Transportation to send out as discretionary grants. This money is basically DOT gets to pick the winners and the losers. And you can just see, this is just some of the big programs, but they're pretty gigantic number of programs. For example, passenger rail down in the bottom center is 36 billion that they get to send out over the next 5 years. So essentially, someone would apply to the government. I think I actually have a slide on this Yeah, so in this instance, for discretionary grants, cities, states, communities, depending on the different grants, they apply to the federal government. The federal government picks the winners and losers, and they fund those projects largely on a project basis. So you apply for a specific project. A couple of them allow programs or suites of projects, so they can be a little bit broader. But what this means is that the federal government has to do a ton of work. Let me see if I can go back. A ton of work to get all this money out the door. So just to give you a sense of scale, I don't know offhand what the exact number they give out in discretionary grants currently is, but that RAISE grant, that 7.5 billion over 5 years, normally that's around 5 billion over 5 years. And the bulk of the rest of these are all new, except for LONO and CIG. So a whole bunch of this money is brand new. It's going to take the government a while to get this money out the door. Some of the programs will be faster than others. Let me see if so just to give you a sense of timing, formula money is going to flow first because that money is automatic and it's based on formula and it's money that we already know how to use and spend. Some of it may be slightly delayed as they work through some of the new requirements that are in the bill, but for the most part, that's going to be the fastest money out the door. The next tranche are going to be any of the existing grants that got new money. So the RAISE Tiger Build program, the infra program, capital investment grants, trying to think through who I'm missing. There's another big one. LONO grants. All of those have existing requirements in place. The department knows what to put into the NOFO. They might need some tweaking based on changes in the bill, but for the most part, those grants are ready to go. They have staff assigned to them. They'll be the biggest next tranche of money out the door. The ones that'll be a little further removed, maybe several months removed, maybe up to a year, are new priority grants. So things that are a high priority to the department and they want to get out quickly during this administration, that's things that we've heard the Biden administration talk a lot about. So it might be things like reconnecting communities, which helps tear down infrastructure that has separated communities in the past. Climate, anything associated with climate, it's a big focus of this administration. High-speed rail. The rail money does both intercity passenger rail and high speed. That's a huge priority for President Biden. So you could see those start to move out the door, but they are going to take several months to get going because they have to do a rulemaking and then write the NOFO and then put it out for everyone. So it's going to be a little slower on those. And then I think the last tranche is really just all the other world of programs. There's only so many bodies at the department that can do the work of getting the grants out the door, assess them and rank them and get through the approval process, and then work with the grantees to move those projects forward. So there's not a huge tranche of DOT staff. So it's going to be a little bit of a bottleneck. So for the good news of having all this money sitting there, the slightly more dimming news is that it's just going to take a little bit for us to get all of those projects out the door. The good news, even based on that, is that it gives us time to help prioritize what the goals for the region should be with this funding, which projects might be most beneficial, gives you time to really hone in on the areas that you want to focus on. So I think for the recommendations that we've been giving SACOG is really to focus on these existing grants that we know are going to go out the door quickly, the RAISE build, infra, any of those existing pots, and then start really working as a region on what are the big projects that you all might want to apply for as part of those new priority grants. And that is all I did on the slides. Does anybody have any questions before I exit out of these? Okay, so I didn't do a slide for this, but just to flag, if reconciliation does pass, that's that big, slightly bigger $2 trillion pot, there will be additional transportation in that pot very likely. And so we'll keep you up to date as that new pot of money comes out the door. Some of that money may be able to flow a little bit faster too, but it will also contribute to this backlog of discretionary grants because the bulk of that money is through discretionary grants. So this is exciting news for infrastructure. There may be more exciting news coming, but it's definitely going to be a process over the 5 years. All right, I'm going to exit out of this.
Devin, this is Michael. Is with the programmatic dollars that flow first, are those, so does those funds go into state DOTs and MPOs, or I'm just wondering where that, or does it go further than that, like into actual counties and cities?
It depends on if what you're eligible for. So for the most part, it goes to the states. The states are the largest recipient of the federal formula dollars. They're sub-allocated. They do flow to the MPOs, but nothing's changed in that process. So how it exists today, for the most part, is the same way it exists. It will exist. There's a couple of new programs, so folks will see increased money under new programs within the formulas, but the process itself doesn't change. And essentially how it works for the state is if the state builds a project, they submit to the federal government for reimbursement, they get reimbursed the dollars, and that's how they get back the funding that the state has spent on those projects.
Understood. I mean, do we know, do we have any guesstimates for what SACOG might be in line for with this package?
Eric, I feel like someone had pulled that up. Do we have those numbers?
I don't have them right off the top of my head, but Director Saragosa, it does vary by program. And so I think, in broad numbers, there are some of these things are a 50% increase, some things are 100% increase. I think what we are doing now that this is real is we want to look at actually analyzing it and seeing what the implementation is going to look like. And so we're going to be setting up a webinar for the local agency staff and transit agencies to really dive into those details. We can also come back and do a board level briefing on what does this mean to the surface transportation block grant funds that we rely on, the CMAQ funds that we program every funding round. So, and then there's a new carbon reduction program that is specifically earmarked that will go to MPOs. There are some other things that are in the details. It's, the bill's over 1,000 pages long. And so there's things that it's unclear what's a state responsibility, what's an MPO responsibility. And so some of those things we're going to work with Devin, and we'll also be weighing in as USDOT puts out these mini rulemakings over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding folks that while these are federal programs, once the federal funding flows down to the states have a very big role in how their individual state money goes out the door. And California in particular has many layers and rules on this. So it will be a little bit of a sort of dynamic process as all of that shakes out.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks all. It's a super exciting time. Very excited to figure out how to get to spend all this money over the next 5 years, but I think it's going to mean great things for all the projects that the region's trying to advance.
Terrific. Okay, Robert, you want to go ahead and call item number 6?
Thanks so
Sure,
much,
item
Devin.
6. Mega Region Working Group meeting summary with Clint Olton.
Good morning. Just pulling up a slide deck right now. Should all be able to see that. So I wanted to give just a couple of highlights on the last mega region meeting that we had for this year. Specifically, the group endorsed a set of 12 priority transportation projects for our regions to work together on. And these projects have some, I wanted to give a quick update on what's going on with these projects. There's some immediate next steps and some grant applications in the works that I think would be worth going through really quickly. And this dovetails really nicely with the last item. Part of the purpose of reinvigorating this mega region working group in the last 2 years, and then specifically identifying these priority transportation projects was to increase our competitiveness for state and federal programs. And with such a massive increase in that federal transportation infrastructure program, a lot more competitive programs coming down the pipeline, where I think we're positioning ourselves quite well to be able to compete for some high priorities. So at the last mega region meeting that we held, we brought this item to this committee previously, that we had looked at these 12 projects. So at the last meeting, the group officially endorsed these as our 12 mega region priority projects. In the Sacramento region, the corridors that we're focusing on, 80, 99, I-5 coming into Sacramento. So the gateways that we have with San Joaquin, with MTC, those gateways represent more than 50% of the travel that we have into and out of our region. So these are massive, important corridors for interregional travel. In the SACOG region, we have 2 highway investments, priority highway investments, managed lanes on both I-80 onto US 50 coming from Davis into downtown Sacramento, and then I-5 managed lanes also coming from Yolo County approaching downtown Sacramento. Both of these projects currently have, I think we're expecting their environmental impact reports to be released this winter and then finalized in the early spring. Just in this past June, the YOLO, the I-80 managed lanes project was awarded about $86 million in an infra grant, federal infra grant. It's been supported in the past by about $8 million in SACOG funding awards. It still needs around $50 million. So it will be looking to get that additional funding in a future program. And then the I-5 managed lanes project is currently pending a $25 million ask from the last RAISE program. I believe we're expecting to hear back on the RAISE program later this month. And then also, as I mentioned, it's got an EIR we expect to see this winter coming out in spring. Those are the 2 major highway projects. We also have 2 rail projects. So Sacramento to Roseville, adding a third main track for Capital Corridor service, which would allow us to up the service to 10 trains a day, so 2 additional round trips a day into Roseville. And then the very large Valley Rail program, which is about a $1.3 billion expansion of the Valley Rail program. A portion of that would be extending the Altamont Corridor Express up into the Sacramento region, terminating all the way at the Sacramento International Airport. Both those projects are have some active grant applications out. The third main track, is currently listed in Caltrans draft Interregional Transportation Improvement Program to get $30 million. So that is pending. They are planning to come out end of this month, apply for Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Program at the federal level. They're looking for an additional 30 to 40 million there. And then just later this month at the board, you'll be considering an action to give them a share, about $2 million of the American Rescue Plan Act funding that is coming to our region for transit. So that is the active work on the Sacramento to Roseville third main track. And then on the Valley Rail side, that's been largely funded by funding back in the budget deal in 2017 when SB1 came out, with about $400 million out of the state budget then, and then another $500 million in 2018 from the Transit and Intercity Rail Program. And now currently, they've still got about $300 or $400 million in need for this full extension. They are waiting on also waiting on a RAISE application, hopefully later this month, 25 million that would go to the North Lathrop Station expansion. And then they've also got about $8 million, I think, sitting in the Caltrans Interregional Transportation Improvement Program that we should be hearing about for some operational and capacity investments in Elk Grove. And then Butte County actually also just received a grant to look at continuing this service from Marysville on up into Chico. And so they just released an RFP to go and study an even further expansion that would add on to this. So those are the 4 SACOG region investments that we are monitoring, that we're tracking, that we're working with our partners at MTC and San Joaquin to elevate those projects for future grant funding. All of them still, they've got some funding already. They've got some good applications that are pending. All of them have additional future needs. So we'll continue to work on getting those on a path to getting completed. So I will, one other project I should mention, it's not a capital project, but we did apply for a Caltrans planning grant to look at zero emission electric heavy duty freight charging on into our region. So 80, 99, I-5 corridors. we worked with MTC and San Joaquin to get an application in to do a much larger study on where we might be siting some heavy duty charging infrastructure and some, I believe, hydrogen infrastructure as well. So those are the 4 major capital projects, plus there's that additional feasibility study that we're really focusing on right now. So I can answer any questions. I've also got Sam Shelton here who can help answer any questions, but I wanted to give a chance for directors Frericks or Kozlowski or James if you had anything to add to this. The last note I have is in your packets about meeting schedules for next year. You've got the mega region working group. MTC is taking over as the lead agency next year. It was San Joaquin this year. We'll have a vice chair position. And then going into 2023, SACOG will take up the mantle as the lead agency again. So that's my update. I'll hand it off for any other questions or updates from the others that were at that mega region meeting.
I should call back up. To my knowledge, the only thing is adjust. So,
Well, I just have a question, but Lucas, if you wanted to add any color to that, you've had the longest sort of continuity on this mega region project.
Thanks, Mike. And just add just a quick couple comments. I mean, so thanks so much, Clint, for the overview of the discussion. I think the key for me really is, it's one thing for us to have these meetings and talk about, sort of, ground rules and, sort of MOUs and things like that. And, and there's a lot of discussion of sort of high level policy. This, I think, marks a really important milestone, this last meeting, where it was like, okay, we've actually now, as the 3 regions, agreed to very specific sets of projects that, we agree as the 3 regions to sort of champion together, because we do know that we have, yes, our own separate 3 very distinct regions, certainly, but this list of 12 projects really does have significant impacts across the entire mega region. And so, I think it really represents a major milestone of not just sort of getting together and discussing, issues that affect our region, but actually really agreeing to actually sort of advocate sort of uniformly on this batch of projects. The other quick item would just be this, this effort has been extremely strongly supported by the private sector, by the business community across the 3 regions. I think it's one thing for the government agencies to all have these discussions, but it's very, very important to note that the private sector and, Bay Area Council, Metro Chamber, GSAC, San Joaquin Partnership, that there is a strong desire across the 3 sort of regions, business communities, for us to work on some of these issues and solve them together as well. And then lastly, really quickly, the real key that we all talked about is it's one thing to have the 3 MPOs working together. Now we need some of these, in this case, state agencies such as Caltrans to all work together. The mega region actually has the Caltrans districts. There's 3 separate Caltrans districts across the sort of Northern California mega region. And so it's essential that we make sure that the state agencies in the districts of this within the state agencies are also working in tandem to ensure that we have projects that don't just stop at a county line and one district, one Caltrans district and another are sort of, it stops at the county line. So and our district line. So therefore we're not necessarily coordinated on it. It's imperative that we get them to do that work together as a state agency. So thanks for your opportunity to make a few comments.
I'll turn it over to Tom for a question in a second, but I want to echo what Lucas said, that the work that Lucas and others and James and Clint and everybody on the staff has done to get us to this point has been tremendous, because our MPO has been leading this as much as anybody. So good work. Tom, you had a question?
Yes, somewhere along the way, Clint mentioned that the Valley Rail Link was going to go to Metro Airport. Did I hear that correctly, Clint?
SAC International?
Yes.
Yeah, the plan has it going up into Natomas, potentially getting it. I don't know if it has a station at the airport. James, you might know a little bit more. It's not at the airport, but it gets you up towards the airport.
It's Elkhorn Boulevard, a couple miles to the east.
So what's the idea? A link between that station and the airport? Like
And that's the idea.
Oakland International has something like that, as you know.
Yeah, and again, that's Dan Levitt at ACE and San Joaquin Valley Rail Commission. I mean, yeah, we have a longer discussion about how important it is to actually get all these transit links right into airports, aka the Denver International Commuter Rail. You walk out of the terminal right onto that. I think it is pretty tough to do that in this situation, just because you want to keep going, as Clint mentioned, and actually potentially get up to Marysville, Yuba City, Chico. That is that same corridor. So that link becomes important. Good news. One of the grants that we also helped secure last year out of SB1 is to basically punch Elkhorn Boulevard through right to the airport. So you don't have to touch I-5. You can just do a straight shot over.
I think that's great thinking. Thank you for sharing.
Excellent. So my only question, I guess, for Clint, I suppose, is the SACB had an article about the planning for the ACE and the San Joaquin's projects. And I think they were just intending to kind of unpack the complications of doing rail projects, period. But they left the impression when I read the article that there was some major scaling back of some of it. And that isn't really the case, is it? They were just trying to, as I said, unpack the complications.
I'm happy to take it, Clint.
Yeah, go for it.
Just the day that article came out, I actually happened to see Dan Levitt from ACE and the San Joaquins again, who is, I just think, and Stacey Mortensen, who runs the agency. It's great to get media attention on it, but I think Vice Chair Kozlowski, you're right. In some ways, that was a bit of old news. We had known this was getting delayed for a number of reasons, some environmental work, a lot of COVID delays, but we have been on this kind of schedule now. This is the same schedule we've had for the last couple of years, which is we hope we could open service in 23. So stay tuned. It was, as you said, I think, an unpacking and a critical analysis of, hey, what's happened and how come it's not here sooner? I think originally we were hoping 21 that service could begin. And again, if the board is interested, we had both the Capital Corridors and ACE San Joaquin's at a full board meeting earlier this year. There's no reason we couldn't bring them back early next year to give you all updates. That project, and as many of you know too, as Clint mentioned, the third track to Roseville is a very live project and a very important project. These are tough, not easy to do in terms of managing them, but frankly, just as you all know, very critical. The Sacramento Roseville is often thought of as like, oh, you can get from Roseville to Sacramento. No, actually you get from Placer County to the Bay Area. That's what that is. And then eventually actually over to, we hope someday, to Truckee and Reno Sparks.
Very good. Thank you, James. I really appreciate that. Okay. Any last questions from board members for anybody? Comments? All right. Fantastic. Well, we'll look for updates on that as we go forward. Robert, will you please call the next item?
Yeah, item 7, we have the Green Means Go roundtable meetings with Casey presenting.
Good morning. I'm Casey Lazan, Deputy Executive Director for Planning and Programs at SACOG. This item today is to apprise you of staff's collaborative efforts with stakeholders to secure funding for Green Means Go. I have 4 things to cover for you today. 1, a quick recap of where we've been with Green Means Go. 2, the meat of the presentation, which is where we are right now with stakeholder input. 3, some next steps. And then 4, we'll ask your questions, comments, and feedback on the stakeholder input you hear about today. So on the first item, where we have come from. So Green Means Go is a program that was established in the 2020 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy to help this region meet our ambitious state target of greenhouse gas reductions from passenger vehicles. The most effective way to reduce those greenhouse gases is through strategic infill development in cities and counties in the SACOG region. Where is this infill development focused? It is within green zones. These are the areas that 23 of 28 of your cities and counties so far have identified and adopted by resolution. These are places that the city or county has policies to support infill development and has said green zones are ready to receive Green Means Go investment. So SACOG has, of course, advocated with a lot of support from this committee to the state for funding for this program for the last few years. Specifically, we were trying to get $100 million a year over 4 years. We were successful this year in getting $38 million to spend over 4 years. But we know that that is not enough funding to accelerate the infill development that the region needs in order to solve our housing crisis, achieve those greenhouse gas targets, and recover from the economic impacts of COVID. So that brings me to my second item, which is where we are now. So as we look ahead to 2022, your staff reconvened our local government and private sector stakeholders into 2 roundtable meetings over the last week and a half to accomplish 2 things. The first was to update them on the great news that we have $38 million to accelerate infill housing development. But then secondly, to brainstorm with them what other state and local policy changes would help to accelerate infill development in green zones. What else do we need to continue to work on, knowing that we have not fully secured all of the state support that we had planned for? So we asked for both state and local policy changes, because what we have learned in our Green Means Go advocacy, through the board's commercial corridor task force, through Civic Lab Year 2 that focused on commercial corridors, through our Mind the Gap housing initiative, and through our Main Streets planning assistance, is that local policy change is the local match to state policy change. So it's going to take every stakeholder, local, regional, and state, for Green Means Go to have its full impact. So we had 2 very productive brainstorms. The first was a public stakeholder meeting. We had 36 agencies represented. Director Kozlowski was also there to participate. So you may have some commentary to share as well. And then we also had a private stakeholder meeting following that. So we had 9 representatives who either build or develop market rate or affordable housing or advocate for those builders and developers. The notes from these meetings are in handouts 1 and 2. We also sent these notes back out to the stakeholders for them to review. So what I would like to do is, because you have several pages of input that we were racing to pull together to send to you before this meeting, I want to highlight a few themes and some ideas that came up repeatedly across both of those meetings. So the first category would be in funding and financing. Both public and private sector stakeholders had a lot of ideas and some alignment even that we want to explore with them. So more policy around state funding programs to allow state money to be the first money into an area instead of the last money into an area, which is what the current situation is. Another idea was to advocate for changes to the scoring criteria for state funding and financing programs so that affordable housing projects in particular in the Sacramento region's infill areas can be competitive. Another idea under this category was to try to figure out how to use or make more usable enhanced infrastructure finance districts, which are a scaled down version of redevelopment, not fully implemented across the Sacramento region. A second category of ideas under impact fees. And this actually, impact fees came up in both the public sector and the private sector meetings. And one idea in particular that was hit on consistently was to change the way impact fees are charged, rather than charging right now on a per unit basis, to charge fees per square foot, so that you're encouraging builders to build smaller unit sizes, or at minimum, not disincentivizing smaller unit sizes. So in other words, if you have a 1,200 square foot unit and a 3,000 square foot unit of housing, let's just use those as examples to be a bit extreme. Right now, both homes may get charged the exact same impact fees. And so to charge by square foot would mean that 1,200 square foot unit would get charged lower fees compared to the 3,000 square foot unit. Another idea under this category was for better coordination of impact fees across various government entities, because when you have multiple government agencies that are charging fees on a piece of dirt or an entire corridor, those fees are not currently coordinated, and so they can, as we have heard time and time again, make any construction or any change there just infeasible. Another category that I bring up is CEQA streamlining, which was really called for more out of the public sector. Lots of discussion about this, but it boils down to two ideas: more meaningful CEQA streamlining that reduces risk even more for development, and or more meaningful statutory exemptions, so outright exemptions from CEQA for the housing that we need in infill areas. This for sure is something that we would like to explore more, in part because when we started out with Green Means Go, trying to identify and scope this program, CEQA wasn't necessarily the thing that was identified as the biggest issue. It was actually the funding, which is how we got to Green Means Go. So in some ways, it's logical that we would hear, okay, CEQA next. And then finally, I just want to give a highlight of some of the complementary local policy actions that were identified. There were lots of ideas for streamlining local approval process, from tried and true specific planning to providing pre-approved prototypes for accessory dwelling units, to doing fee estimates ahead of time so that a prospective applicant for a project will know what they're getting into in terms of cost. And then also something that has come up with this committee and actually came up with both public and private sector stakeholder groups, reducing or eliminating parking minimums. That's in a nutshell what we heard from them, but I want to acknowledge that staff is still digesting this, and we will be going back out to those stakeholders to do more refined input, which leads to my third topic for you, which is next steps. So we will use the state policy ideas to inform a proposal for state advocacy work in 2022, like the next steps for fully realizing Green Means Go as a program. And we're going to use the local policy ideas we received to inform the Green Means Go grant program and partnerships. And then as far as the status of our $38 million goes, the Housing and Community Development Department is going to develop draft guidelines for $34 million of that. We plan to comment on those guidelines when they come out. We may be asking for support from stakeholders in those comments. We anticipate some information coming out of HCD very soon, perhaps this month. By statute, SACOG can apply for the first 10% of funds in January. So once we have guidelines, draft guidelines come out, there will be a quick process to getting to January. The $4 million of our $38 million is going to come to us through the Strategic Growth Council, and we expect to be working with them on transferring of those funds over the next couple months as well. And then finally, my fourth topic, which is where I stop talking, I'd like to ask your questions and comments and feedback on the stakeholder input that you have heard about today. Your questions and discussions will also be one of the key inputs into how we shape our Green Means Go advocacy for 2022. And there you go.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I certainly was there, but don't have much to add because that was very thorough. Thank you. Excellent. Any questions from board members? Okay, no zingers for Casey. Fantastic. All right. Well, James, any final word on this one that you'd like to add?
I know we've had this in front of you all numerous times, and that is because it is so vitally important, as Casey said. So we've got the 38 million. There will be a grant program, right, as Casey mentioned. So this money is going to be awarded through a grant program. We want to be thoughtful about how we do that. We wish we had 100 million. So it's going to be even harder to pick. Very honestly, right? I think the projects with the biggest bang for the buck through that 38. And then just as Casey mentioned, in terms of all this feedback we're getting, and she walked through all of the, sort of the themes and did a really nice job on that. As we have heard you all in this committee in particular talk about this, we intend to inform our 2022 legislative agenda. So you might think just on the face of it, well, we should go back and get the rest of the money that we didn't get, right? And that, yes, the answer to that is yes. However, I think we want to be a little bit more nuanced as well on the advice of our state advocacy consultants and wrap that funding request in some policy change as well, right? How else can the state help us? How could we be a pilot region, maybe perhaps? If they don't want to do some of these things statewide, maybe we can argue for us, we can try it here, right? We can open source some of these innovations, and we can invite them in, as Casey was saying, with the Strategic Growth Council to see how these things work. So I perhaps maybe take your the lack of questions right now, you're not interested, is that you have been hearing this consistently, and Casey did such a great job, and I just want to make sure that you all are tracking how important this is, and also just how it feeds into next year, and this committee's oversight on our LEDGE program, and the whole board's oversight on these grant funds. And frankly, back to the previous item on reconciliation and infrastructure bill, but also the larger reconciliation bill, there are programs and there are language in there that are, I think, very also represent a lot of potential to add to this 38 million. So.
Very good. Excellent. Yeah, it did occur to me that, one thing you said, James, which I think is important, is that when we did those roundtables and tried to, get people's opinions about what legislative things we should pursue in order to try and stimulate affordable housing. One of the things that came up is the kind of layered upon layered building code requirements that make actual construction just more expensive, and kind of maybe, within bounds of safety, of course, recognizing that sometimes when you need a cabin in the woods, you don't put all of the bells and whistles that you put on a house in the suburbs. So anyway, that's one of those nuanced things where trying to, scale back some of the things that are in those types of regulations, which kind of grow over time without people paying much attention to them, might be something for us to work on. And it's a nuanced little aspect. So, very good. Thank you very much. Any final questions, anybody?
Director Farrick says his hand up.
Lucas. Yes, sir.
No, thanks so much. Appreciate it. A couple of quick points, just in a question. So thanks, first of all, Casey, for this presentation and update, especially on the roundtable discussion. It sort of my comments dovetail into sort of, I guess, what James was talking about in terms of, and the question was around, with a proposed $75 billion surplus again this year. I mean, I think it's imperative for us to be going after more money, right? I mean, like, I understand that our initial ask was $100 million last year or the past couple of years, and it ended up getting, roughly 40 million out of that. And I understand there's probably going to be a desire by some in the legislature to want to see a sort of a proof of concept before maybe awarding more dollars. I get that. But I think that we should still, and so you sort of touch on this about with our sort of LEDGE platform in the year ahead, I understand the sort of the idea around proposing some policy changes in order to maybe seek some additional funding. But I just would, suggest that, I mean, with a $75 billion proposed surplus again in the coming year, like, we should absolutely be going after some cash, I think, additional cash for this. I mean, I think stepping back and sort of the issue, the sort of larger issue of, and keeping the eye on the prize around the Area Resources Board, giving each of the 4 major MPOs in the state, 4 major regions, these major GHG reduction targets, right? In our case, 19%. And then basically the state not really giving us much in the way of tools to actually help achieve those 19% reductions. One of the tools that potentially is at our disposal is money. So I think that especially when we have unprecedented levels of surplus. So I think that was one of the key premises originally around Green Means Go, was like, right, give us some money that would allow us, and we proposed this project to sort of pilot some of these things. I think that still is a sound rationale that we should be approaching the legislature, certainly, but the state on, with the various agencies in the administration. And so I do think that that would be something, obviously we'll probably be talking about more in the months ahead, but I do think it's important for us to continue to sort of do that. And then lastly, with regard to some of the items that are talked about in the staff report regarding potential examples of local changes, one, I do appreciate the discussion around fee reform and things like that, But one thing that we've heard consistently again and again is the cost of infrastructure, sort of say like sewer pipes or water pipes, right? Not being able to have the capacity to have dense infill projects on top of them. Something, I don't know what kind of thought has been paid yet to that specific issue, but we know it's a real one, and it doesn't look like much of the examples of local changes that are contained in the staff report sort of deal with that issue. I mean, there's definitely an issue around again, the structuring fees sort of to lessen the burden on folks to maybe help facilitate some of those infrastructure improvements, but nothing more than that. So just curious about that from Casey and or James, and also might want to be giving a little bit of thought to that as well. Thanks.
If I may address that question, I can start, James, if you want to add onto it. Our hope, your staff's hope here is that Green Means Go can be used to pay for some of those major upgrades. So it was an interesting conversation to hear that the impact fees are very high, which is very true. But on top of that, we know, which is why we've developed the Green Means Go program, that we need to pay for the upgrade of that infrastructure. And so the idea is that Green Means Go could pay for the actual upgrade to some of that sewer or that water or the drainage infrastructure, in some cases to just completely take that cost off of the books. That said, there are many other services, infrastructure, and other services that have fees that are charged. And so I think the idea is let's also look at the rest of those fees, because we know that even if we did have $100 million, that we couldn't fully reduce the cost in every green zone that there is.
Yeah, and I think that's a great answer, Casey. And for some of you, I think the other piece on the water sewer, Director Ferrix, which I think is really a great opportunity, is our burgeoning partnership with a lot of the water agencies and RWA in particular. If you heard their lunchtime presentation last month. And so, because as you know, a lot of our water sewer upgrades are going to have to come through our special districts. We're going to have to come through our water sewer agencies. Some of you have your own water sewer, others don't. And also, there is a lot of money now at the state level and the federal level specifically for water sewer upgrades, right? And so, I think finding common cause with our other special district agencies, which we really started to do, I think, in earnest with the federal infrastructure stimulus report, feels like 5 years ago, that was just last summer. But actually we did find common cause through that and developed, I think, a sort of a renewed and burgeoning partnership with the water agencies and RWA and PCWA. So that's the other piece of this, right, is to be able to figure out what other buckets of funding are actually now available and may come soon available still if reconciliation passes, that could be leveraged through the 38 million.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the responses from both of you.
Okay, great. Any final comments or questions from Tom? You got a question?
It's actually not completely germane to Green Means Go, but I just want to remind my colleagues, over 20 years ago, we set up something called Projects of Regional Significance at SACOG. It was the first time we started aggregating money for a larger purpose than individual jurisdictions. There was about 20 projects on that list. 19 of them got completed. The one that didn't was the connectors between State Highway 113 and Interstate 5. So this freeway basically dumps its traffic onto Main Street, Woodland, and sometimes we're almost at gridlock at that point. Also, we have so few options in the Sacramento area for evacuating people. If one of our freeways goes out, like Interstate 80, it's happened a couple times. They all get sent up 113. We need to get these connectors done. The reason I'm alerting my colleagues to it is if we can't get it done when we've got this kind of money, it'll never get done with the state surplus as stated by Lucas, with the wonderful infrastructure bill just passed. We've got to find it. Caltrans wants to get it done, but we all just have to decide we're going to get it done. So Please keep it in the back of your minds. That Sacramento International Airport is such an attractive place. It brings up a lot of people from the Bay Area to use it. They all come up 113 and have to get on Main Street before they can get on I-5 to get to the airport. So it's an important project, and I just hope everybody will remember it. And I hope SACOG staff will be thinking about how we can put together a strategy to get these two conveyors done. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Director Stollard. Okay, any other comments or questions? Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll look for future updates on this. Thank you. Robert, would you please call the next item?
Sure. We're item 8, the 2024 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy Update presented by Binu Abraham.
Good morning. My name is Binu Abraham, and I am the project manager for the MTP SES. And I do have a presentation for you, but before I get into it, I would turn it over to James to talk a couple of things before I start my presentation.
Sure, thanks, Binu. Some of you heard and had a deep dive on this item in the Strategic Planning Committee, those of you that serve on the SPC a couple of weeks ago. As you know, we're kicking off, we talked about Green Means Go just now in terms of what was actually in our last long-range transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. Stand by for a new name. Thanks for some of you weighing in on that. So it's not a mouthful, an acronym mouthful. But as we kick off our next plan, which is due to be adopted in 2024, it is time for us to do a number of things, including think a little bit about the framework, the overarching framework for the plan. And we have been trying to think now for a little while about how we can continue forward our focus on economic prosperity, which I would make the case that a lot of the mega region that you heard about earlier is increasingly about the economic prosperity of our two regions, along with our tradable sectors and supporting the Brookings Report. We have been trying to figure out how do we lift up a lot of the emerging and nascent work from the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group and really elevate equity so that it is on par with economy. Quite literally, when we did equity or environmental justice the last time around, it was an appendix. And so we're trying to figure out how through the transportation, housing, development, growth patterns, jobs, can we actually elevate equity to that level too? And then finally, on environment, our 30, as you all know, we talk about our greenhouse gas target all the time, but it's increasingly very obvious and clear to us that there are many ways in which public health and resilience in terms of climate and natural disasters and increasing natural disasters that are going to be here with climate change. How can we be proactive about that? So there I will, before Binu goes in, and I'm going to hand it back to her here, we understand that we could probably sit here and come up with a lot of different goals to have for a plan. And it's not that there aren't important things like safety, fix it first, potholes, many elements that we actually have to take into account as we do a plan. But what Banu's going to talk about is a framework that really can sort of be an overarching framework, weave together some of the work that the board and the staff has been engaged in over the last 2 to 3 years, and also use that frankly as a communication strategy, and finally set that up, I think, set us up for success as a region with the new federal infrastructure bill, and potentially the Build Back Better reconciliation bill. So that's my longish opening. Thank you, Banu. Back to you.
You're muted.
And we rehearsed that so well.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Let me just share my screen. All right. Okay, so as James mentioned, the framing of the MTP is the triple bottom line approach. And as he mentioned, there are 3 goals for this triple bottom line: equity, economy, and environment. So the purpose of this presentation is to have a discussion about what a triple line bottom line approach would look like as a guiding principle or a guiding framework for the MTPSES. So this is included in your staff item as an attachment B, and staff has taken a stab at drafting a goal statement for each of the E's. So what I would like to do here is to talk a little bit or add a little bit meat onto what does that goal statement mean in the context of the MTP update, and how can we use them to set up the policy guidelines for the process. So we will take any feedback or idea you have to shape the full policy framework that we will be asking you to adopt in February. So with that, let's look at the first goal statement, which is the equity. And I know I have broken the cardinal rule of PowerPoints by adding too many words on my slide. So I'll just take a pause here so that you can read and observe it before we go on. So this is the draft statement that we have framed for the equity. A just and inclusive region where investments are being made in historically marginalized communities, so race can no longer be used to predict health or economic outcomes, and outcomes for lower income residents are improved. So the question is, how does this statement translate into any questions for the plan? An example of this question would be like, how can MTPSES reduce racial disparity and try to provide more safe access? How can we increase transportation investments in areas of high concentration of minorities? Or it could be the improved safety in communities of concern. Just so that you know, these are not questions that we are saying we already thought about and we want to answer. I'm just providing a couple of examples of how that equity statement would translate into indicators or metrics for the MTP. It could also be perhaps increase the transit access to essential destinations like hospitals and schools for the disadvantaged communities. Another way might be providing more mobility choices, or it could be, if you look at it from a land use perspective, increasing the small lot or attached housing in high opportunity areas. This is something that Casey went over in her Green Means Go just a few minutes ago. So these are examples of questions that we would be exploring in this plan under the triple bottom line approach. Going on to the next E, which is the economy. This is the draft statement that staff has prepared for you. Again, I will pause here so that you can read and observe it before I go on. So what is economy? A diversified regional economy built on the expansion of key economic clusters, including agriculture and food, health sciences, and innovative mobility. An inclusive economy in which all people have access to resources that give them the opportunity to realize their full potential. How can we translate that? Perhaps a question we can ask as an example to address economy in the planners: how can we in MTP prioritize infrastructure investments and growth patterns that support the region's key economic clusters? Just to give a context to the picture that is before you, this is the AgStart in Woodland, which is a lab space for research and development to support our agricultural economy. It was developed as part of our economic prosperity plan by the Regional Prosperity Partnership. Maybe a question we could ask is, what investment does the region need to make to improve our competitive standing among peer regions across the country looking to grow, attract, and retain talented workforce? Or how can we better facilitate connected communities so that business owners and residents have better access and opportunities to thrive? So economic prosperity is not a new topic for us. We have used that in our previous MTP too. So these are some of the questions that we can use to answer that part. Moving on to the third E, which is environment. Again, I'll pause here for a second. A safe and resilient region for all residents, where natural resources and air quality are sustainably managed, so people can thrive here for generations. What does that mean beyond achieving the greenhouse gas reduction? It would mean asking a little bit further about how the MTP-ACS transportation investments and strategic growth planning reduce carbon emissions in the region. Or it can be, how can the MTP-ACS prioritize infrastructure investments and growth patterns that will help the region more resilient in the face of climate change? Just to give a context, this is the Ice House Lake, where both drought and fire are major concerns. Forest management and a lot of recreational activities need to be addressed here, which is a big concern for everything. Another question could be, how can the MTP-ACS reduce or mitigate harmful tailpipe emissions and other automobile-related pollutants that negatively contribute to health, such as asthma, heart disease, and lung diseases? So before I turn it back to you to have a conversation or have any feedback for us, I just want to make sure that we are looking for how we can incorporate what are some of the feedbacks you might have for us, so that we can use that to shape the full policy framework that staff will be asking you to adopt in February. With that, I would open it up for discussion.
Well, if there's, are there any questions right this minute from board members? James, is there sort of a bookend to that presentation in your mind? It seems very straightforward to me, is what I'm saying. I personally kind of love the alliteration of the E3 thing, but I mean, conceptually, it's on the mark with the lion's share of all that we have discussed over the time I've been on SACOG, at least.
In some ways, I know Director Stoller and I had this conversation, the Strategic Planning Committee, or actually all of us had it, because you made these comments, Director Stoller, to the committee itself. It may seem obvious, it may seem sure. I mean, that's kind of that makes sense, and if that's how you're at, that's great, because the hard work now is actually translating to figure out what does that actually mean, right? How do we actually have projects and policies and even growth and housing, right, that actually can hit? The idea is not to trade off between the three E's, but to maximize them, and to do our homework here in the region, like I said, so that we can actually get ready to be competitive from some of our state and federal grants, and because we want to maximize the three E's. So I don't know that there's necessarily a bookend. I do think that the details that come next, and the question and how we answer those questions, how your staff answers those questions, how we translate them on the ground to transportation and growth and land use, that's the work still to be done. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
It is coming back for adoption, Banu, correct, in February, and that's, we were giving you basically, this is sort of a preview, right? And I think we very much understand, and I've been through many of these exercises, right, where we can add goals, and we can add them and add them and add them. And I think what we're trying to do is to at least propose to you initially here, let's have a focus, let's have a top line framework. We can, safety in my mind falls quite easily under this framework. So again, it really just is a gut check and some feedback, early sneak peek here.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Mr. Stoller, do you have a question, comment?
Not really a question, a statement. First of all, thank you so much. I really feel this is really good, because simple, crisp, minimal number of objectives is so helpful to those of us who can't remember more than 3 things anyway. But I, at the risk of being a little picky, I would just say I'm a little uncomfortable by the fact that those points, none of them are complete sentences. I read them multiple times because I thought I didn't get it. And then I realized, hey, there's not a complete sentence here. If you are going to express those concepts without complete sentences, put a bullet point in front of it, because I don't expect a bullet point to be a complete sentence. So that's just a style suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Well, at the risk of putting anybody on the spot, I'm curious, just in terms of, both Lochver and Rich and Galt, you guys have kind of unique situations in the region. And I'm just wondering if anything comes to mind with respect to this for either of you that kind of jumps out to you as it relates to Galt or relates to Live Oak.
I'm gonna turn my video off because I've been freezing up here the last few days. I don't know if it's service, but yeah, a little bit. We in terms of equity, one of the things that really jumps out to me is we, as I mentioned in our, I think it was a Thursday afternoon meeting, we have an issue in our community where connecting the 2 communities or 2 sides of our city is very important, and it isn't connected right now. So to cycle or walk from some of our underserved communities, it's pretty treacherous, to say the least. So we have a Walmart on the east side of our community, and some of our lower income and underserved communities are on the west side, and so they're having to cross a freeway. And so I think this is going to be good in terms of looking at that and trying to establish some policy that will help us make some of those connections a little easier and a little more quickly, right? We have development and some infill development that's scheduled, but it's going to be several years before that happens. So that was about it.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious. Lochver, anything pop into mind with regard to how this, translates to Live Oak's conditions? And I'm sorry to go around the room like a school teacher. I'm genuinely curious because your guys' situation is pretty special relative to how most of us are situated.
Didn't quite get the audio. Had a little glitch in the audio.
Oh, my apologies. I was just asking the framework that Binu presented, seems, straightforward and sort of sensible relative to all the discussions we've had about equity and connections and everything else. And I'm just wondering if, and land use planning is, the underlying thing. I'm just wondering if any of it struck a chord with you, or you feel like it's appropriately structured for the conditions that Live Oak finds itself in.
Live Oak is totally different community than most of the stuff goes on outside. Everything has to be custom done for Live Oak.
Yeah.
But we can use all the opportunities that we can get in Live Oak, and it would help. I mean, the way the thing's been is our community didn't really want to get a lot of houses there because we didn't have any other opportunity. And our fathers in the past, they wanted to keep Live Oak as a small community as possible. But as the next generation come in, that we see that all our talented students and graduates there are not coming back to Live Oak. And so that kind of creates a problem because we invest so much money into our talent that there's no opportunities here for them. And housing is the only thing that we really have going. We don't really have any kind of business We don't have any kind of industrial zoning and many other issues. So we don't have good internet service here. We're lucky to get the highway project through town. We're hoping that that would change our economic outlet for the future by having traffic flow a little bit easier than it has in the past. So we do have a lot of lots in town that we want to get infilled and things, but it's just really, what we need a balance of expensive houses as much as smaller houses where the farm labor can afford those houses, because they can't afford the $300,000-400,000 houses. But like if it was like a Mercy project or CHIP project, what that would generate is a lot more farm labor for us. And when we have the high price houses, we really don't have anybody that wants to work out there out of the farm, because these are people from Bay Area. They just fill in the house or they're buying it for investment. Right. But what our community need is a medium to low price houses where these people are actually the one that put a lot more into our economy, because for instance, for picking fruit and everything, for all the farm work that we have, these people fill in those houses, and that creates or alleviate the labor problem.
Gotcha. Well, I think you put a fine point on the second part of that puzzle, right, which is economic vitality and how all of this stuff interlinks. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Director Stollard?
Yeah, I'm sorry to take more committee time, but
yeah,
to give real feedback, triple bottom line to me is excellent, because I have people who care mostly about the environment. I have people who care mostly about equity, and I have people who care mostly about economic development. So, the point is, with the triple bottom line, is we're saying we're not going to pursue any single goal at the expense of the others. We're going to try to find the synthesis of these three objectives. And it's a huge thing to be putting equity into this thing. That is really new. It didn't even seem necessary so long ago for some of us, but for others of us, it was the biggest thing for them. So now it's rising to the top, and it's going to be considered. So, if you need that housing, you need that housing in Live Oak, because you want your young to be able to stay in your community. You want them to have a livelihood, and yet you don't want to destroy your environment. I mean, you survive largely on agriculture. You don't want to grow onto your farmland and ruin all your farmland because you destroy your economy. So I would say this triple bottom line concept, this intersection of three really overarching objectives, will find itself applicable to every one of our jurisdictions, no matter how diverse they are. So I think it's a really good platform. There's your feedback.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, any final words from anybody on that?
I just want to say, Director Lozano, I've heard that before from Galt and from you, but I appreciate you put it in context. I think if Director New from Winters was here, and Director Stollard, you may know this story too. He'd tell you the story of 505 that actually cut a lower income community off from the rest of the town of Winters. And now we're trying to figure out how to stitch that back together. Again, just connecting the dots back to the Reconnecting Communities program in the federal infrastructure bill that just passed. And I, of course, think about I-5 in terms of how it's split downtown and the West End from the rest. But it's really good to be reminded of, we do need to kind of knit back a lot of these communities. And I think that's a pretty big equity play. And then just Director Gog, obviously you and I have talked a lot about this, but for everybody's benefit, we've got a really interesting project going on up in Yuba and Sutter, where we're sort of asking the question, if economic prosperity is our goal, if that one thing is our outcome, what's the short list of prioritized infrastructure projects that would actually get you to prosperity and in sustainable economic development. If you think about the prosperity strategy, food and ag tech, health and life sciences, innovative mobility. So again, we don't have the answers to that, but I think it's a really interesting exercise. I often say as a transportation person, if transportation is the answer, what was the question? Because if we actually ask the employers, if we actually ask folks like SunSuite, if we actually ask Sutter Buttes Mercantile, right, they'll tell us some really interesting things. And we don't have all the money in the world, even with the infrastructure bill, even with reconciliation. We're going to have to make hard choices, and that's what this MTP SCS really is all about. So honing these questions and not trying to trade off between them, as Dr. Stallard said, but trying to maximize them. It ain't perfect, but I really appreciate hearing your feedback, because I think it is a very thoughtful pathway forward. So a lot more to come, as Banu knows.
All right.
Now I'm going to mention before we get away from this, we just did a groundbreaking this past week for a pedestrian bike overpass across 113. Highway 113 bisects Woodland from north to south, completely divides the community. So the only way to get across it is overpasses, which are not nice things to ride a bike over if you haven't done it. And we have a high school on one side that takes kids from the other side. 2 junior highs are on one side, so everybody on the other side. So in any event, it's a connector, but it costs $7.5 million. That's a lot of money. But we felt the importance of connectivity and bridging the community was so important. We figured out a way to do it. And that's largely done with development fees, James. I don't think we got SACOG money for that project. So hopefully something will work out in Galt, Rich, that you can help do a similar thing.
Very good. Anybody else? Final comment? James, thank you. Binu, thank you very much for your presentation. It was excellent. And I think, Robert, we are now to the receive and file section of our agenda. Anything there?
That's correct. The quarterly report on contracts.
Is there any discussion necessary on that?
No discussion needed.
Okay, fantastic. All right, any final comments from anybody? All right, fantastic. I will, since I've been given the chair seat temporarily, I will say, I really, James, want these meetings, at least these smaller meetings, to be in person if we can't manage to have the full board together sooner rather than later. The discussions are so much more rich when we get to spit on each other, I guess, from across the room. So anyhow,
I think this one was pretty good. We're working on the hybrid technology. Eric and the staff are working very hard. We had some supply chain issues. I know you haven't heard about that the last couple of months, but we're making it so that what we don't want to do is have you all drop out right when we get to a vote. So be patient. Be patient. We are installing technology in the boardroom that will allow, whether it's in person, which I agree with you, is the gold standard, or even a hybrid, allowing really good connectivity so that board members can do both and choose on a given day. Stay tuned, it's coming. We're working on that, and it's being installed, and we're testing it, and we'll have it up and running soon, right, Eric?
Yeah, it'll definitely be running in 2022. So we just want to make sure it works before we have you show up in person.
Okay, then I will tell everybody that we meet next for the last time virtually on December 6th for this committee, and sometime in 2022 we'll have a hybrid meeting. And for today we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Great meeting.